Hi, loves, and welcome to the With Love Always podcast, a podcast to help you live the life you were created for. We are your hosts and your friends, Bree
and Marissa,
and we're so grateful you're here.
We pray you listen and leave feeling more inspired, encouraged, and uplifted. Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is boundaries. And we actually did a whole episode called Setting Boundaries That Create Freedom. And that was one of our very first episodes, and it's actually one of our most listened to episodes. So we still have so many people message us about that episode, and they just kind of want us to dive a little bit deeper into what it actually looks like to set boundaries, which is why we wanted to talk about it again today. So we're going to be talking about 10 boundaries that everyone should have. So we kind of have it divided into different categories just to give you guys some insight on what some of our boundaries look like. If you haven't had a chance yet, we definitely recommend listening to that first episode just because it'll kind of give you some context into why we think boundaries are so important and how they can create freedom, how they're aligned with your purpose, and they help kind of with decision making and giving you just kind of insight into what you should say yes to, what you should say no to. And I just love this topic so much, so I'm really excited for us to just kind of dive into it.
Yeah, so whether you feel like you're so good at setting boundaries, or whether you're looking to expand your boundaries, or whether you feel like you're setting boundaries for the first time in your life, no matter the relationship, no matter, the sector of your life, we pray that today's conversation really just inspires you and hopefully encourages you to start setting maybe new boundaries in your life, or empowers you to set boundaries for the first time in your life. So yeah, we're going to dive into some examples of our own boundaries, and we pray that this ultimately encourages you and, like Marissa says, sets you free in your life, in yourself, and in the power of your yes or in your no.
So like I mentioned, we do have an episode where we dive all into how to actually implement boundaries, but I just wanted to provide one little tip just to kind of summarize. And this is something that I always just reference and say when I'm thinking about boundaries. And the most important part when you're trying to kind of think of what boundaries you want to implement in your own life is always just kind of knowing your why, which is really just the purpose and what you're trying to uphold or achieve. So the why is kind of your purpose, and then the what is actually what the boundary is, if that makes sense. So I'll give just kind of an example of what a why and a what could look like. And so the why could be like, I want to feel and function at my best and kind of steward my body well. Essentially, whys are just things that matter to you that you feel like are aligned with your purpose and your goals, and then you implement boundaries to kind of uphold and protect those. So an example of a boundary that could kind of protect that why is I'm going to eat food that makes my body feel good. So that could be the actual boundary. So just wanted to give an example in case you're new to boundaries or you're intimidated by them. They're really, again, just meant to uphold your purpose and what you feel like is most important. So as we're kind of sharing these 10 kind of categories and boundaries that we have, we also just want to remind you guys that your boundaries might look different, and that is so okay. That's so normal. We just kind of want to spark some ideas, and it will kind of give you insight into what we kind of want to uphold. So we hope, as always, this is helpful, but we're just going to dive into the very first one. So boundary number 1 is boundaries on your time. So I think this is one of the most important boundaries that we can implement because our time is everything. And something that I always just reference in my mind is if I don't decide how my time is going to get spent, so if I'm not proactive about my routine and my schedule, then ultimately it's kind of left in the hands of other people, which means they can kind of decide my schedule for me, or it's really easy for you to start to feel like whether it's in work or family, friendships, people can kind of start to overstep boundaries because you haven't really set those in the first place. So this is where I think we all should just kind of get started in thinking about what do we want kind of our schedule to look like? How do we want to delegate the time in our day? Like, again, going back to the why, what is most important to us? What do we feel like our purpose really is? And then kind of working backwards for our schedule to kind of protect, honor, and reflect that. So, just an example of this and a boundary that I try to uphold is having a day of rest. And I'm not super strict about what day that is. The goal is really just to, for me, like having intentional time where I can recharge my mind, my body, my spirit. I can spend time with God and really just have a restful, peaceful day that can set me up for the rest of the week. So I just have a boundary of honoring a day that kind of protects that. I'm not super strict, like I said, about what day that has to be. And so, yeah, I hope that can kind of be encouraging too with boundaries. It's like, they don't have to be super regimented. You don't have to say like, okay, 8 a.m. to like 2 p.m. on this day, I'm doing this. But if you more have that intention of, okay, every day I want to, for 15 minutes, make sure that I prioritize prayer or I prioritize exercise, something like that, I think can be a really great boundary and just kind of an easy place to get started.
Yeah, that's so good. I think for myself, one of the boundaries I have had to fight to learn, and honestly, I'm still learning when it comes to the boundary with my time, is more so my social schedule. I think as a very social gal, that is something I have honestly wrestled with for so long. Like I think I'm back like to when I was in college and I felt like my boundaries with my time honestly were non-existent. I remember like expediting my time with social activities or friends pretty much every single day of the week, and there would be no limit, no time frame on, when I would stop hanging out with people. Like I could be hanging out with people until midnight, knowing good and well that the next day I had an 8 a.m. class. And I remember just like at the time when I was a little bit younger, that served me then. But as I've gotten older, I've realized, just with being an adult, having responsibilities, wanting to take care of myself, wanting to prioritize my rest, just like Marissa said, it really required me to start putting boundaries on my time when it came to my social life. So I think for myself, a boundary that I try to implement, and I'm very, very imperfect at this, and I still do not successfully implement this week after week, but I am someone who typically packs my week. And I love making the intention, even during the week. Like I'm always trying to make plans to see friends or to catch up and go on a walk with someone or to grab lunch with someone. And I know for myself, when I look at my schedule at the end of the week and I'm like, oh my gosh, or not at the end of the week, at the beginning of the week, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just booked myself and I have something social every single day from Monday through Sunday. Knowing myself and knowing as I've began to implement more boundaries around my time, that is going to leave me feeling so burnt out and it's going to leave me feeling so exhausted. So a personal boundary that works for me is I try to schedule plans like every other day. So for myself, if I know I have dinner plans on a Monday, I'll try to make sure that Tuesday I leave it open and free so I can just prioritize myself, and then resume maybe plans on Wednesday, and then make sure that Thursday is open and free, and then resume plans on Friday, and maybe make sure my Saturday morning is free, and then, resume plans on Sunday. And for some people who are listening to this, you may be like, okay, wait, that is still a lot of plans, and it is, but it's a rhythm and a pattern that works for me. And there are some weeks where, like I said, I don't necessarily uphold that fully because I have maybe more energy, and so the boundary is prioritizing 2 days of rest that week. But then there's some weeks where I'm a little more exhausted and maybe it's prioritizing 3-4 days of rest and no plans that week. And so I think all of that to say that's my personal boundary, but what may work for you may be so different. But I think that is one of the top boundaries that I cannot encourage enough when it comes to your time, because just as Marissa said, I think it's so easy when we don't have a set of boundaries for ourselves. We really put our time in the hands of others to decide where our time is going. So yeah, that's a tangible boundary with my time that I try to implement week after week.
I love that one. And I feel like that just goes to show like with boundaries, a lot of times it's trial and error. So
Yeah.
I had no idea how much rest I needed, how much alone time I needed when I was like 18 or in college. Like I just remember having no idea. And it wasn't until like my early to mid 20s where I was like, oh, I actually understand what my social battery looks like and what my capacity looks like. So I'm going to start to try out some boundaries, see if they help. And then from there, you can kind of iterate. So again, this is such a like learning and kind of evolving process, but yeah, we just kind of want to share what works for us.
Yeah. And I think even in that, when you start becoming more secure in your boundaries with your time, and we'll talk about this throughout this whole episode, you start becoming more secure in the communication of that. Like I think about, actually today's a Sunday. I went to church today and I was with two other friends that I sat with at church. And afterwards they were going to brunch. And of course, everything in me wanted to go spend time with them. I hadn't really seen them all week long. And instead, because I knew what would honor my time was actually focusing on the podcast and, writing an outline for the podcast, I decided that my boundary in that moment was to not go to brunch with them, but was instead to take myself to a coffee shop to be by myself in order for me to accomplish what I needed to prioritize. And there was such confidence in me being able to communicate, hey, love you guys, but I'm going to go prioritize this because I have been implementing boundaries. And I think that is the beautiful thing that we'll discuss throughout this whole episode is the more that you just become confident that boundaries are here to protect you and set you free, the more that you are willing to communicate lovingly to those around you what you need and what is necessary for you to have that freedom in your life. Because I know for myself, like if I were to have shown up for brunch today with those friends, I would not have been very present because in the back of my head, I knew I was neglecting what I actually wanted to prioritize today. So those are some boundaries around our time. Jumping into another boundary, it is the boundaries on what you talk about. So this is going to look so incredibly different for everyone, as literally every category we're going to speak about will, but I think for myself, something that I have implemented is when it comes to what I speak about, I first and foremost really have grown to implement the boundary of staying adverse and staying away from gossip. And I know that we are all human, and I know that it is so easy to talk about someone else in relation to a circumstance or to, I don't know, we all know what gossip looks like. We all know what it looks like to talk about someone, whether it's their life personally, who they are, who we think their character is. And there's a time and place in which those things can be expressed within the sanctuary of a close friend. But I have found in my life that the more that I've indulged in gossip, the worse that I will feel. And the negativity of speaking such negative words over someone else does not leave me feeling very good, but also is just not the kind of person that I want to be. I do not want to be someone who is indulging in negative talk about anybody else or a circumstance. And so in moments that I see my heart maybe wanting to indulge in negative conversation, I will implement the boundary of just stopping myself, because I do not want to be one who is known by being capable of speaking those things. Two is bringing the energy or inviting conversation to speak negativity. And three, I rather, fill my mouth with words of life versus words of death. And I think that is something that I've become so cognizant of, especially when it comes to the boundaries over what I talk about. I personally very imperfectly try to refrain from cursing. And I mean, I do still sometimes, moments if I'm frustrated or just simply because I'm a human, but I try to refrain from inviting those words into conversation, not because I think they're bad or I think anything different of those who invite those words into conversation often, but I just personally don't want to be speaking out the energy that those words hold. And so those are boundaries that I've implemented for myself, and I'm cognizant for myself. And just use that more so to protect how it makes me feel And of course, ultimately, to protect those around me who are having conversation with me, I want to make sure that when I'm talking to someone that, regardless of the topic of conversation, I can make anyone around me feel safe. And I know for myself, in times when gossip has been present or in times when cursing has been present, me sometimes hasn't felt the most safe or most invited in that person's presence or in that conversation. And so knowing that that's how I've felt, I want to ensure that I don't make other people feel that way. And so that's why I do set those boundaries for the way that I choose to speak about, people, life circumstances. So those are some of my boundaries when it comes to what I speak about. Am I perfect in them? I'm perfect at none of these boundaries. But I've found for myself, like, that is what makes me feel like I'm able to protect myself, but also protect others that I love.
Yes, and I love those so much. And just to highlight what you were saying about like being imperfect in these boundaries, sometimes boundaries can be a bit of like a North Star for us where it's like,
Yeah.
here's what we want to get to, but we're imperfect about upholding them. But we know if we set that intention that we will get better. And I know even for me, like, it is so common to hear like gossip. Like, I've just found that so many people, I'm not sure if it's just where we live or just the age we're in, but I feel like everybody wants to talk about other people. And sometimes it's not even bad. But for me, I just like anytime somebody is talking about somebody that's not in the room, I just instantly that like puts a little flag in my mind. And I'm like, do I want to continue to remain like in this conversation and a part of it? And I just always try to ask myself whether I'm listening or I'm about to share something, if like what I'm about to say or hear, is this life-giving? Is this encouraging? Or is this intentional? I include the word intentional because sometimes there are times where I want to share something about somebody else in like a very safe relationship because I need to process it or ask for advice, but that is with the utmost like intention and protection for that person. But I think if we can just be so mindful of what we speak, again, going back to the episode where we talk about the power of words, like we are speaking life or death over other people. And so I just like want to encourage us all to be so mindful of what we share and then also what we give permission for other people to share to us, because not to be like intense, but I will just stop people if they're talking about other people. And again, just saying it in such a nice way, but being like, hey, like, I know for me, I just have the boundary, like, not to talk about other people if they're not here. And like, I'm happy to praise them if we want to celebrate something amazing in their life. But other than that, I would just rather talk about them when they're here with us. And so that for me has been so helpful. And I feel like it can catch people off a little bit, but they always are like so grateful. They'll like come back and be like, thank you, because that actually made me realize I was unintentionally gossiping in a very minor way. But again, I think it just like with anything with words, it can kind of build into something that we never really intended in the first place. Okay, for boundary number 3, boundaries on your health. So for the sake of this, both physical and mental, I'm going to touch on physical though. I just really try to view my health in the in kind of a long-term lens. So it's not really about like what I want in this moment, but how I want to feel when I'm 70. And so I always just think of like, oh, what a treasure it is that I get to take care of my body. And I see there being a lot of responsibility with that. But a specific boundary I have is actually that I do not let myself engage in exercise that isn't fun for me. And I know that's kind of silly, but I just feel like I found enough exercises that I love doing. And by exercise, I mean like hobbies or like even moving your body. So like surfing, tennis, yoga, things like that. There are so many things where I get so excited to do and I find them really fun and life-giving that, again, when I'm looking at like really caring for my body well, I only want to be doing things that feel good for my body, but also that get me excited. For me, I've really just found like when I can view that moving my body should be joyful and it should be honestly a reward and something that's fun, that just allows me to be more excited and honestly just uphold that from a place of freedom. So,
I love those. I think for me, more specifically, and this is something I'm actually trying to work on re-implementing, is my boundary around my bedtime because that affects the time that I rise in the morning. And so for me right now, my boundary with myself is that I want to be asleep between 10:30 to 11:30. For some people, that may be early. For some people, that may be really late. And regardless of where you stand, that is my boundary for myself. I know that the moment I choose to stay up past 11:30, that is going to cause me to sleep in the next morning, and then that's going to therefore affect my next boundary I'm going to mention with my physical health. And for me, something that is a boundary with myself is I am just not one of those people who can wake up and go straight to work and start being on my laptop, being on my phone. A very important boundary for myself is that first thing in the morning, I'm moving my body to some sort of extent, whether that is going on a walk, whether that's working out. That is such a boundary I've had over my physical health for so many years because I know that when I get to honor my body through some sort of movement, whether it's a run, surfing, working out, walking, like I said, that really sets me up to have the most productive day. And I know that moments when because of just life or being busy, I have to surpass that morning, routine and morning boundary with myself and have to just jump straight into work. I do not feel my best that day. And of course, there's times and moments where that is so okay. But for me, it's like my first 2 hours of being awake are so sacred and such a boundary of my physical health. And so those are two very distinct boundaries that I do have. A boundary that I feel like is something that I've more recently had to remind myself is such a deep priority. It's actually the boundary of rest within my workout routine. And so I think something that we hear so often is when it comes to working out, it's the frequency of what we're working out. But also I think another boundary that we need to have with ourselves is also the frequency in which we're resting. And I think about, for example, this week, I think it was on Thursday, my body was feeling a little tired and everything in me just wanted to work out that day because yes, I could have probably pushed through and had the energy to work out, but I was just reflecting with myself of you know what, Brie, you have exerted your body a lot already prior to this day. And though my mind wants to work out because I think that would be honoring, I actually took a moment to recognize that, I need to have a boundary with myself to not overexert my body and actually choose to prioritize rest. And so my boundary is making sure that I am prioritizing rest at least twice a week. And sometimes that's more. Sometimes there's days or weeks where I rest 3 times a week or 4 times a week, meaning I only work out 3 times a week or 4 times a week, whatever it may look like. But I think the more that I've gotten older, I've also seen that as much as I want to have the boundary of how often I'm moving my body, I also want to have the boundary of how often I'm giving myself permission to truly, truly rest. So the next boundary we're going to speak on is boundaries around your faith. And so for us, our faith is so important to us. It's really everything to us. And I know for myself, as I just pursue my life with God and I pursue my faith in the day-to-day, I think a boundary that, I really was reminded of this past week that is so sacred for me to implement in order for me to feel my best, to feel the most freedom, to feel the most joy is truly the boundary of making sure I'm prioritizing my time with God. I know for myself, and maybe you feel the same way in your own life, it is so easy for, God is a part of my day-to-day life. I look to him for everything, even subconsciously. I know that because God is within me and because I believe in him, that I'm always turning to God. I'm always seeing him in the details of my life and in my day. But I don't want that to be mistaken as intentional time with God or intentional time in prayer or intentional time pursuing my faith and really allowing God to fill me up. And so I know that it's really, really easy, especially maybe around this time of the year, around the holidays, when you just feel like life is at full speed ahead. I know I've been feeling that, and I'll let a week go by and realize I didn't really journal this week, and maybe I didn't read my Bible this week, and maybe I didn't spend time praying about the thing that was weighing really heavy on my heart, but I spent a lot of time talking about it with all my friends. And I think for myself, a boundary that I really have to uphold in my life is making sure that I'm prioritizing that intentional time with God. And I think for myself at different points in my life, that looked like, spending time with God first thing in the morning, or spending a certain amount of time with God. But at this point in my life, that boundary really looks like, whether it's the morning, the afternoon, or the evening, just making sure that I am in some sort of pursuit of God intentionally with my mind, with my time, with my attention, at least like, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a week. And I know that some people may be hearing that and they're like, wait, shouldn't we be pursuing God every day? Yes, I absolutely am. But I think the reality is, at least for myself, there's times when a whole day passes by and I didn't journal and I didn't intentionally pray, and also allowing that to be okay and such a reminder of my humanness, but in that not allowing my week or my schedule to consume me and not prioritize what I really know is necessary for me to feel my best during the week.
I love that so much. And I think even when we were thinking about like what are boundaries in our faith, and honestly, I feel so grateful that we actually didn't really have many come to mind. And that's not to say that we don't have them, because I think we absolutely do. But what I think is so special about that is just that when it comes to like boundaries in our faith and just our faith in general, is that it always comes from such a place of love and such a genuine desire. So it's like this is a relationship that we get to pursue and that we want to pursue in the same way. We don't feel like we have to do certain things for our friends or our spouse or our family. It's something we get to do and we're really excited and we want to. So I feel like a lot of boundaries in my faith are like honoring and protecting that, like protecting the fact that I have this precious relationship and I want to always approach it from a place of love and joy, and just viewing it in a way of like, oh, what an honor it is to like serve a God who loves me, and like what an honor it is that he desires a relationship with me. And one like specific boundary that I have that maybe is like a little more quote unquote like what you would think of for a boundary is I just am so passionate about reading your Bible and understanding scripture, and it's something that I love doing. And I just really get excited about that. And so I just have a boundary where I always want to be in pursuit of better understanding the word and just making sure that I'm prioritizing time to do so. And I really feel like that is where truth lies, and that's where I can understand God's character and understand how much Jesus loves us and all of these things that we reference. And so I just really want to always honor and protect that is such a sacred thing, that we have the ability to access the word of God. And so I feel like it's my responsibility to understand it the absolute best that I can. And I think that's going to be a lifetime's journey. So that's why I want to make sure I'm always just kind of prioritizing it. And that actually leads me to boundary number 5, which is boundaries on your mind/your inner dialogue. And this actually goes very hand in hand with the previous one of faith. And that is because the most important thing and the thing that I protect the most with my mind is really allowing the narrative of how I view myself, the thoughts that run through my mind. I only want those to be dictated by truth. And so I believe that other people, although they can point out things that, may have truth to them, I ultimately want my guide to be what God says about us. And I want that to be what really fills my mind, and to make sure that's what's narrating my mind, and that's what I'm in tune with, and that I can hear the Holy Spirit and hear, just these things that truly are life-giving and encouraging and convicting in a good and healthy way. And so I'm just very protective of when I let other people speak into my life, or when I let other thoughts enter into my mind. I just always want to make sure that they're based on truth, and that they affirm an identity that is life-giving and that is going to allow me to be the best version of myself. So anything I can do to protect myself from just negative thoughts is so important to me. So I don't know if you have any boundaries on that as well?
Yeah, I feel like I have a lot of boundaries with my own inner dialogue. And truly, it's more so like the way that I speak about myself internally. And I think these are boundaries I've implemented years and years now that I feel like it's so second nature. But I do have a lot of strict boundaries with the way that I will talk about myself in my mind. Like the moment that I notice an insecurity coming up, or the moment that I see myself speaking poorly about myself in my mind, or the moment that I'm like highlighting a flaw or I'm disqualifying myself or whatever it may be, I will just stop that train of thought in its tracks and literally tell myself that it is unacceptable for me to speak to myself that way. And I mean, of course, in my humanness, there's moments that it's so easy to want to sulk in insecurity and to want to like sulk in the feelings of not being good enough. And I think that's a part of the human experience. But for myself, like I am so adamant about stopping those thoughts in their track because I do not want to give opportunity for any of those thoughts to grow or to evolve and to lead and bleed into other areas of my life. And even with like beyond myself, I think because that's such a strict boundary that I have with myself, when I hear friends speaking something about themselves, even if it's something so silly and they're like making a joke of like, oh, it was so stupid that I did this, I will literally correct them in their tracks and be like, do not call yourself stupid. Like, do not give opportunity for that word to even be associated with yourself, even as a joke, because that is subconsciously doing something to your mind that you don't even realize. And it's just not worth it. So I would say that is a huge boundary I have with myself. And yeah, I've fought so many years to be really, really strong in. And I think because I refuse to allow negative self-talk to consume my mind, it's not that like I'm confident just because I think like I'm incredible, but I'm confident and secure because I do not allow things that are not honoring to my true identity in God and how He created me to infiltrate my mind. And I think the more that I fixate my eyes on the way that God created me and allow His life-giving words to be the only things that are going through my mind, even in moments when it's tough to believe those things, that is why I feel like I can carry such a sound confidence to me, because I'm not allowing myself to be under the weight of, negative self-talk day after day after day.
I feel like you're really good about that and you're really intentional. So I love that.
Okay, next boundary is boundary in dating or marriage, if you're married. And whether you are single and dating, whether you're in a relationship, whether you are married, this is just boundaries overall in anything relationally. So for me, when it comes to boundaries in dating, I just was telling Marissa, I was like, I think I subconsciously have so many that I can't even like think of all of them if I were to really list them out. But I think first and foremost, like I do have physical boundaries when it comes to dating, or more so not even when I'm in a relationship, but more so like even when I go on dates. I personally, and everyone's will think differently on this, which is why it's my boundary, is I typically refrain from wanting to kiss someone on a first date. And not because I have any sort of weird rule on that, more so just because what is a very big priority to me is connecting with someone on an emotional level and seeing that emotion so rightly that I'm not getting clouded by any sort of physical intimacy. And so I think for me, that's a really big boundary that I love to implement in dating and has personally been very successful for me in making sure that when I'm going on dates with someone, I can just see their potential, their character, who they are rightly, aside from any romantic stuff. And so that's a really, really big one. I think also I have a lot of boundaries in like the type of pursuit that I expect. And so I have boundaries in, the boldness of the man who's asking me out, or the type of dates that they're willing to take me on, and, the time frame in which I'm willing to spend time with this person. Like, there's such a list with that, but, there's certain dates that I will or won't agree on. There's certain ways that, depending on how they're asking me, are they intentional with their ask? Are they asking me to hang out? Like, if I'm being asked to hang out, a boundary for me is like, I'm sorry, I'm not a hangout girl. Like, you are pursuing me type of girl. And so my boundary is I will reject someone who doesn't want to step up to the plate and pursue me in dating, but rather wants to provide a casual option in dating. And that's just my personal boundary because I know the intentions behind the type of dates that I want to go on and the type of man and the type of pursuit that I've always prayed for. I think lastly, another boundary I will mention when it comes to my dating life is I think I have a very good boundary at making sure that I do not over romanticize my dates and I do not allow myself to jump ahead or to get excited too quick, because I think it is a form of protection for myself to make sure that I'm viewing this person I'm going on dates with very rightly, and I'm not romanticizing the what ifs of us, or not romanticizing, who this guy could be when I don't actually know who he is yet. And so I think not allowing my identity or my hope for the future to be associated with this person is a boundary that I have implemented. And that's a boundary I created after being hurt by my own train of thought and previous dating scenarios where I get so excited about a guy way too quick and then it disappoints me. And I've learned that lesson enough times to be like, whoa, I need to have a boundary in protecting myself so I don't feel that level of defeat again and again and again. And so, yeah, those are just some of my personal dating boundaries. I feel like I could go so much deeper, but that could honestly be a whole episode.
Yeah, I was
within itself.
I'm like, there's so many, and you have so many good dating boundaries. And just to briefly touch on, I'll give like just one example of a marriage boundary because, again, there are so many, but to be very tangible, like one thing that my husband and I have decided works really well for us is having a day, so just an intentional date. And it actually doesn't fall on a specific day, but just making sure that we go on an intentional date at least once a week. And that is really just so that we can get outside of our day-to-day routines and comforts and make sure that we're really honestly pursuing one another and being intentional and having quality time to just talk to one another and really check in. I think we can get so comfortable in relationships that we can just kind of go about the same like day-to-day life. And there's a beauty to that. Like, I love when you can be so comfortable with somebody, you can just sit on the couch and like do nothing and be in each other's presence. But I think with that comfort, I always want to make sure that we're being so intentional to still be romantic and to be in pursuit of one another and to ask questions that we wouldn't just ask, when we're in passing or going to bed at night, that we provide the space and the time and just the ability to listen and really check in and see how the other person is doing. So that's a boundary that I personally really love and look forward to. So moving into number 7, boundaries with your family. This is such a hot topic. I feel like just from what I've heard when I'll ask people like their context of boundaries, it normally is because they've had to put in boundaries with their family because their family has like overstepped things. And again, that kind of connects to what I was just saying of like, when you get really comfortable with people, you almost forget that they can have boundaries and that that's okay. And we should be proactive in asking people what their boundaries are. But I would say just with families in general and with the holidays coming up and seeing extended family, the boundary that I just have is being very intentional and aware of what I do share and what I don't want to share so that I'm never put in a awkward situation where I'm like, oh gosh, did I overshare? And now they're going to ask about this thing that I didn't want them to know about to begin with. So I just know that there are a few things that are just really special to me and like the privacy of that. And so I would say just like as a reminder, when it comes to family, you are absolutely entitled to a sense of privacy. And so, yeah, there are just a few topics. And even I think for myself now being married, there's, another person in the equation. And eventually when we have kids, like wanting to honor their privacy. And so a lot of it for me, like I'm comfortable sharing a lot of different things. So I'll pretty much share my emotions, opinions, anything in my life. But when it comes to my spouse and wanting to honor them, I want them to have the opportunity to decide like what they do and don't feel comfortable with. So I always just try to be really respectful with that when I'm speaking about just people in my life in general. But Yeah, that's a big one, I would say, with families, just knowing what you are and aren't comfortable with sharing and talking about, and just not feeling any sense of guilt with that or letting other people make you feel guilty just because you want something to remain more private.
I think like the more that you become an adult, the more that, just to what Marissa said, I have seen myself need to implement boundaries on what I do or do not share with my parents. And not in a way that is like, oh, I want to withhold or I want to be secretive or anything like that. But, you know, I think just knowing what is meant to be sacred to you and what you don't need an opinion to be spoken into, I think that is something that I have implemented the older that I've gotten. You know, sometimes there's been moments when I've been speaking with my family members, and whether they're inserting an opinion on a circumstance or advice on a circumstance, and I have to have the boundary of like, hey, like, I love you guys so much and I respect everything that you guys have to say or desire to share, but you know, truthfully, I don't want advice on this right now. I'm sharing this to simply express it. And so, you know, whether it's asking a family member to refrain from giving advice or refrain from giving their opinion or refrain from asking about something in particular, I think as an adult, we have every right to make sure that that is a boundary that we have. Like I said, not because we love our family any less, but just because some things are meant to be sacred to us, and it's okay to implement that, even though it can feel really uncomfortable, whether it's with your parents or your siblings or extended family. But I think ultimately, like, if you know that hearing someone's advice or hearing someone's opinion or having someone ask the question to you that you do not want to answer is going to lead to conflict, it's better to have one awkward moment of stopping that conversation in its tracks versus letting it go on and then growing to be frustrated with that family member. So next up is boundaries with your work and your career. Oh my gosh, I feel like this one can, I mean, they're all hard in their own way, but I feel like this one can be super duper hard, especially, I don't know, in a culture that really prioritizes like hustling and like doing, like advancing your career, accomplishing all these goals. I think there is so much focus on work and career. There is so much indulgence and conversation around who you are, what do you do, what does it look like, what does success look like, what does wealth look like, what is your job title, all that sort of stuff. But I know for myself, when it comes to my personal work boundaries, I mean, I have so many. I think first and foremost, I am super duper stingent about how late I will work. I know there's a time and place to be flexible. I know there's a time and place to show up and to extend yourself and go above and beyond. But in regards to the day-to-day routine, I am very adamant about, you know, after 5 to 6 p.m., that's a boundary I'm able to make with my job. I really try to shut off from work. You know, I don't try to allow work to overextend into my personal life. I don't allow it to really interfere with my personal life. And I mean, it's going to interfere from time to time here and there, but I found for myself, the more that I implement that boundary with how late I allow myself to work, or even how early I allow myself to work, going back to my physical health boundaries, is that I know that for myself, it will allow me to prosper in my job and show up with such excellence in my job when I put restrictions around when I work. I've seen in seasons where I've extended those hours, or I've, you know, compromised myself to work really late or to work really early, whatever it may be. It really causes me to feel like resentment towards my job or my position, or it causes me to feel frustrated. And that for me is just something that I know is a simple fix with just good boundaries around my time and my energy. Another personal boundary for myself as well is, I think work is always going to be a big part of all of our lives. I think it's so important. But for me personally, it's probably one of the least important parts of who I am. And as much as I love my job, I love what I do, and I'm so passionate about what I do, it is not the first thing I want to be talking about when I'm going to dinner with friends or I'm catching up with a friend. Like, I am such a matters of the heart girl. So I think that is a personal boundary I try to have. And it's funny because I feel like it's something that my friends actually comment on, that they don't always know what I do, like for work, because it's literally something I don't talk very much about, because for me, it's not the utmost importance to be talking about like over dinner or with friends or whatever it may be. And so, yeah, for myself, that's a boundary that I like to have, not because it's not important to me, but because I rather keep work and I rather keep personal so much more than just my job. So, yeah, I find I choose to not talk about work past work hours or even with like coworkers. Like if I am with them beyond working hours, I really try to make sure that the conversations that we're having are not just centered around work, but it's also, like I said, kind of the matters of the heart sort of conversation. So, yeah, those are just some of my personal boundaries when it comes to the time that I spend working, but also the conversations I have around my job.
Yeah, and I think especially in a place where like it's so easy to idolize work, and I know for me, like I'm somebody who I always have enjoyed working. Like I've been working from such a young age, so to me it's so much fun that I have in the past overworked at times, and I think I've gotten to I've almost approached work from a place of seeking fulfillment. And so for me, a lot of my boundaries are in order to now like protect that, where obviously I want to be passionate and do a job that I feel like I'm good at, but really just finding my fulfillment elsewhere, I think is really important. And it honestly has allowed me to have the freedom and yeah, just remove some of the pressure when I am setting some of those other boundaries, like you mentioned, of having out of office and being like mindful of working hours and things like that. But
Yeah. Last thing I'll say too, and the reason why I'm so passionate about the boundaries of like how often I talk about work is because I think we all know someone who like work is their everything. And anytime you're talking to them, it's always about their job.
yeah.
And sometimes that's so exhausting because it's like, who are you though? Like, who are you independent of your job?
hmm
And yeah, that is also like additional reason why I try to refrain from being known by my job.
Yes. Yeah, that's huge. And that's really good. Boundary number 9 is boundaries on what I consume. There's so many things. Again, this is one that I think it's so unconscious. Like I really don't know that I have a specific boundary of like I don't consume this thing, but just something that I do have like the one reference point. I feel like I just always try to ask myself like, is this TV show that I'm about to watch or movie or music that I'm going to listen to or podcast, like, is it life-giving? Am I going to learn something? Is it going to make me feel good? Is it going to make me laugh? Like, what's my intention in doing this? And how am I going to feel? Like, is it going to bring like joy and allow me to like have a sweet moment with a friend to watch this show? Or is it going to be something where it might make me feel like a certain type of way, or I might not like the word choice or even like the lifestyle choice or just different things where I'm like, it can almost create a sense of like uneasiness and that defeats the purpose because of a lot of times when I'm wanting to consume things, it's from a place of like either education or relaxation. So just making sure that if I'm going to go out of my way to consume something, I want it to be something that really adds value to my life. And I think we always say this, but like when we live in a world where there's so much being thrust at us, like it really is our responsibility to set boundaries and to honestly just shield ourselves from the media, from all of the things that are wanting to be thrown in our face. And so I just always try to be super intentional with consumption because I find that when I'm not, I actually feel like it really affects my emotions, my sleep, relationships. Like it honestly is crazy that I see such a byproduct from what I'm consuming.
Yeah.
It's honestly kind of scary.
Yeah. I think about myself, like there was definitely a point in my life where I had to be really, really strict about the music I listened to and the movies I would watch and the TV I would watch. I would say I'm not as strict anymore, but I think like in those seasons in my life, like the reason why I did have such strict boundaries is because I was like almost made aware as if for the first time of like the extent that music for example, can like speak such negativity and such like honestly like foulness into existence. And I remember having this moment probably when I was like 20 years old where it was almost as if for the first time I was like really hearing lyrics to like popular music. And don't get me wrong, like I love so much music. I listen to so much type of music, but even to this day now, like if I am listening to a song for the first time and there's something that they're referencing to like sexually that doesn't sit right with me, or they're on it. This is actually a huge one for me. Like if I hear like God's name in vain in a song, for me, like when I hear that, it just like turns me off so fast. And I will, doesn't matter how good the melody or the song is or how catchy it is or how trending it is, I personally will like skip the song and I will choose to refrain and not indulge in that song. And I mean, there's plenty of trending songs that I know I listen to that are also, maybe inclusive of that. And it just sounds catchy and whatever it may be. But I think it's just such a personal boundary of like, I know when I'm listening to a song and it really just does not sit right with my spirit, or I know that it's causing me to think maybe, lustful thoughts, or it's causing me to want to speak in a certain way or wanting me to think in a certain way. Like, I will just shut that down so fast. And like I said, I think at different points in my life when I was younger, I was very, very strict about that because I knew where I was tempted and I knew the things that really caused my mind to like spiral or to be in an unhealthy place. And now because I had those boundaries for so many years, those things don't affect me in the same way. But I really encourage you, if you've never been really intentional or made aware of the music you're listening to, really like press into that, because I think more times than not, a lot of music is like really, really just not life-giving.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think for myself, it's like I always want to protect what I'm subconsciously allowing to enter into my mind, because what is subconsciously coming in is consciously going to come out. And so I think same for like shows. Like I personally just refrain from watching anything violent. I refrain from watching things that are scary. I do not like scary movies. I don't want those images in my head. I don't want the thoughts in my head. I know it's not real. Some people might have a better tolerance than I do, but I just don't want to infiltrate my mind with those images. And I see for myself, like, and this is one that actually might be controversial. I don't like listen to like crime podcasts or anything like that, which some people love that stuff, which is amazing. But I know that that's like a boundary I have with myself and what I watch and what I listen to, because otherwise my mind becomes this really timid place and it becomes this really scared place. And then I have suddenly all these images of things that could constantly go wrong, that it just is not healthy for me. And I think there's a fine line between being made aware, but also overindulging in some of those things. And I found for myself the sweet spot with that is just honestly to abstain from any violent, scary, true crime kind of stuff. I don't love it for myself. So that's what I refrain from when it comes to what I consume. So last but not least, and if not probably one of the biggest boundaries that I think we're all going to fight to have and to implement around is our boundaries on social media. And so when I was thinking about this, I'm so grateful that now I feel like I have such a healthy relationship with social media that I think some of my boundaries are very subconscious. But I think back to when social media used to be a really challenging place for myself, and I know it can be a really challenging place for so many people, including myself at different times. But I remember distinctly a point in my life where social media just was like the source cause of such deep comparison. And from comparison comes defeat, comes insecurity, comes feeling not good enough. The list goes on. It is just a very unhealthy cycle. And so I remember back at this time in my life, I remember I used to follow a lot of like celebrities or like big influencers who honestly lived very unrealistic lifestyles, who had unrealistic beauty standards, and just, I don't know, like felt like they were like this bigger than life kind of person. And I remember during this time, because I was struggling so much with social media, I just took it upon myself to literally unfollow every single celebrity I followed and to just like not consume that type of content. And I found for myself, like, when I do not indulge and I do not consume content of, girls who are, like I said, living a very unrealistic lifestyle compared to my own, or who have beauty standards that I know I could never look like that because of X, Y, and Z, it really helps start making social media a more safe place for me to get on when I'm not constantly subconsciously like infiltrating all those images into my head. And I think fast forward to me now, like that doesn't necessarily bother me in the way it did when I was younger, but that's only because I was so proactive in implementing that boundary of, hey, I know that when I consume, you know, XYZ celebrities content, I feel really not good about myself. I feel like a loser. I don't feel pretty enough. I don't feel successful enough, blah, 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 blah. Fill in the blank for yourself. So I'm literally going to stop consuming that because it's just not making me feel good. And so that is a huge, 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 huge one. Just being mindful of who you are following. Why are you following the people you're following? I think it's almost like our human nature to like love to indulge. And I think sometimes we even indulge in people's lifestyles and content. But when you really ask yourself why you follow someone, sometimes, at least for myself, I found like I'm only following this girl because she's like pretty. She's not adding value. She's not teaching me how to dress. She's not inspiring my worth. She's not, giving me something to pursue a more joyful life. Like it's literally just causing me to feel bad about myself. Like, why am I following this person? Those are really tangible boundaries that I have for myself of only following people that actually feel like they're adding some sort of subconscious value to me when I'm on social media.
Yeah, I think who we follow and who we let speak into our life is huge. And a lot of times we can almost think of it as being like separate, where I'm very intentional with the people I surround myself with, and they're very like sweet, encouraging individuals. And yet there's like this contrast of on social media or some of the like shows I used to watch. It was people that I wouldn't be friends with. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why am I letting these people actually, why am I letting them speak into my life, or like indirectly I'm hanging out with them or like hearing their words more than I'm hearing my friends' words because I'm spending time consuming their content. And so that was like a huge wake up call. And I think just being so intentional, like a lot of times I'll hit follow without, I don't know, I'll just go on somebody's page and I'm like, oh, so cute. And I'll just like hit follow. But it's like you have to be so mindful because it's so much more than like a follow. And like for me, the mute button is my best friend because I think you can really shape social media to work well for you. And so like you can train the algorithm to give you life-giving content, and you can choose who are the 5 stories that I want to see every day because they make me feel encouraged, or I learn something new, or they're just like funny, whatever it is you want to feel from social media. I think we can receive that. So my boundaries around social media are really like who I let speak into my life, like who I let end up on my feed, and then also just how much time I let myself spend. So I always try to take at least one day of the week where I'm not on social media, and I find that that is super helpful. And sometimes that means being off of it for a week or two, which is also great. But I think as long as I'm being intentional, I can find that it does become like a safe and enjoyable place for me. Those are our 10 boundaries. I hope you guys found them helpful. I hope they inspired you and maybe gave you some ideas of some boundaries that you can try and see if they work for you. But again, we just want to say that boundaries are meant to reflect who you are as an individual, what your purpose, what your goals are, so they can absolutely look so different from ours, and we hope that they do, and we would love to hear what some of your boundaries are. And the last thing I'll say is just giving people grace with boundaries. I think when you become someone who, we've both experienced this, you get very familiar with what your boundaries are and are not, and you really want to honor and protect them. I think it's so crucial that you communicate that proactively, and to give people grace if they overstep your boundary if you never communicated it. So just being really like gracious with people and trying to over communicate and do it from such a place of love that again brings freedom to your life and to others.
Okay, so for love notes, we're actually just going to share very briefly our highs and our lows of this week. I almost feel like I'm laughing as I'm about to share my highs and lows of this week, which it's not funny, but it is in hindsight. So I guess I'll go ahead and kick us off. So I'll actually start with my low, even though I love to start on a positive note. But my low of this week was I actually got my phone stolen at Trader Joe's. And yeah, it was just, Trader Joe's is supposed to be a happy place. My phone got stolen literally within the first 2 minutes of being in Trader Joe's, and someone actually reached in and took it out of my bag when I was turned around. So,
Oh my God.
ladies, let this be your reminder to zip up your purse. Does not matter where you are. You honestly cannot trust people, and I learned that the hard way coming from literally the most trusting person ever. So yeah, just be very careful of your bag. Do not turn around at all, even if you're turning around for a second. It was just kind of one of those moments that I was like, you know what? I could be upset about this, but I think the greatest sadness in this circumstance is not the sadness of my lost material item, but it's actually the sadness that someone must be carrying in their heart to be capable of like harming and stealing. And so literally when it happened, I just like prayed for that person. I was like, God, I'm so like heartbroken that they're like having to live with the guilt of doing this tonight, let alone probably frequently. So it was all good. And honestly, I felt like God was just protecting me so much from like not actually being that upset, which was amazing. But that was my low of this week. And then I would say my high, I mean, I got a new phone, but wasn't really my high of this week. I would say my high was like so simple, but on Friday I just decided not to make plans with anybody, and I just took myself to the beach, and I just sat on the beach and like journaled for like an hour and a half as the sun set, and just prayed a lot and just like had such a beautiful time with God. And I mean, for as much as I always catch the sunsets on the beach, something about Friday was just really special because I feel like I was extra present. So that's probably my high of the week.
I love that. My high is a very simple one, but I went surfing on Tuesday, and I actually went in the morning, which I never do. Like, I'll either do midday on the weekends or like sunset surf, but it was the most beautiful, warm, sunshine-filled day, and also the waves were amazing. And it was actually my first time going surfing without my husband. I went with 2 other girls, and it was so much fun. I really feel like I had one of the best surfs ever, and I just was on such a high afterwards. Like, in the car, I could not stop smiling. Like, it was so crazy. It's just funny how, especially with surfing, it's like you can have some rough days. Like, we were talking about literally our bruises from the other day of like just falling and getting destroyed. And then there are days like Tuesday where it just is like unreal, and I felt like I was like in Hawaii or something. But
Wow.
Milo, I'm actually gonna go on your theme of theft. This wasn't this past week, it was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, but again, it's kind of like a funny theft story.
Wait, what?
I feel like you might know this, but also related to surfing. So there was one day that, again, it was like one of those days where it was just exhausting, and my husband and I got out of the water. It was pretty dark at this point. It was like sunset. We were so tired. We're like changing, and then we get in our car. We're going to turn left from PCH to go on the canyon. And we all of a sudden hear a loud bang. And in that moment, we both panic and go, oh my gosh, the surfboard. So we have both of our surfboards strapped to the top of our car, or so we thought they were strapped. We completely forgot to put the straps on, which is like so embarrassing. My husband had like his really nice board that just like literally flew off into the street. And what's so ironic about it is right before that happened, my husband and I were just talking about the fact that I needed to get a new board because my board was kind of like falling apart and I was just like surpassing it. I was like, I need to pick up a new board. Literally 3 seconds later, we see it fly across the road. Thankfully, his board it did get damaged, but it wasn't too bad. And thankfully, it did not hit any cars behind us. That was like a huge panic.
Yeah.
By the grace of God, like it flew off to the roadside where there like wasn't anybody. But my board flew off directly behind us, and the person behind us, I see it get out of their truck, and like I'm kind of where I'm pulled off, I can't quite like get out yet because there's like trees right there. I'm like trying to get out. My husband's like waiting for this car to pass him. So I see from the mirror of my car, like the person behind us picking up my board, and I was like, that is so sweet. They stopped the car, they're going to bring it to me. I'm like, how nice. And then we see them throw it in the truck bed of their car and zoom off. And I was like, did we just see that right? Like, what just happened? And it took us a moment to process, but we're like, my board is gone. Like, somebody took it. And honestly, we were so shocked that it was kind of funny. And I really hope that like, it's same thing as you. I was like, I just hope that they like use the board. I hope they were praying that they could like, I don't know, get a surfboard or something. God gave them my surfboard. Honestly, because I was like, it was about probably to the level where we would have gotten rid of it. It actually ended up being like kind of a sweet story.
Like funny.
And like kind of funny and unexpected. But it was just one of those things that was wild, and also such a good reminder to always double check your car straps and zip up your purse.
Yeah, zip up your purse.
But those are our love notes, our crazy stories from the weeks. And we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I know it was a long one, but we just hope it was valuable and encouraging as always. And we will see you in our next one. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much for listening. We pray this episode was encouraging and life-giving. If you found it valuable, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe.
And be sure to follow us along over on Instagram at With Love Always Podcast. Signing off with all of our love always, Bree
And Marissa.